Hello, class, and welcome to They Don't Teach That. I'm your host, Jay Cobley, and today we're going to be talking about a man with a rather unique foothold in history. Mainly because we still have his foot. What do you get when you cross a New York congressman from a wealthy family, a civil war, and a handful of scandals? That's right, we're talking about Daniel E. Sickles, the first American to win a temporary insanity plea in a murder trial. Daniel Edgar Sickles was born October 20th, 1819 to a respected family in New York City. Though he would dispute this, saying that he was actually born in 1825, something that we'll bring up in a little bit, he actually highly regarded education and took to the printer's trade before being admitted to the University of New York City, now New York University, to study law. He was admitted to the bar in 1846 and was elected to the New York Assembly in 1847. And love would find our Danny boy in September of 1852 when he would marry Teresa Begowly against the wishes of both her family and his own. Why? Well, at the time, Sickles was 32, and she was somewhere between 15 or 16. The history gets a little fuzzy with her age. But this is also why some historians believe that Sickles lied about his age in order to make himself seem younger and more in line to be with this woman. By 1853, Sickles would become the Corporation Counsel of New York City, but would resign after due to his promotion to the Secretary of the U.S. Legislation in London under James Buchanan. It was actually these trips to London that would get Sickles in some hot water. See, he was kind of publicly condemned for some mildly poor choices, to say the least. Like bringing a known prostitute named Fanny White into his chambers, and he even brought her with to meet Queen Victoria, under another name, of course. Well, his young wife was preggo's back home in New York. Mind-blowing, right? Guy had some serious cojones. He'd also kind of gotten himself into some hot water with Queen Victoria as well, due to the fact that during the Independence Day celebration, he refused to get out of his militia uniform. Upon his return in 1855 to the U.S., Sickles decided to run for Senate, and in 1856 he would win that bid and be elected the New York State Senate in the 3rd District. He would hold this position until March 3rd of 1861. Now, during all this, Sickles was also climbing the ranks of the military as well, as receiving the title of Major in the 1850s and later promoted to Brigadier General of the Volunteers in September of 1861. But we will be covering his military career in a bit. Needless to say, it wasn't great, but what's coming up next is definitely some craziness. See, Sickles had some rather strange quirks throughout his life, both in his career and in his personal life. As in 1859, Sickles shot and killed Philip Barton Keyes II, son of Francis Scott Keyes, the writer of the national anthem. In Lafayette Square, for those who don't know where that is, it's actually right across the street from the White House, and he straight murdered this guy right in front of the White House. Mind you, this is 1859, so he is a senator at this time. And upon killing Keyes, Sickles actually surrendered himself to the Attorney General Jeremiah Black at his house. And shortly after, Sickles would be escorted to the local jail to await trial. See, Danny Boy found out that Keyes was giving Sickles' little, back home girl the old salami. And so Sickles, being, well, a respected I'm sorry, I can't do it with a straight face. Sickles was just crazy, and he rolled up and shot him. See, Danny Boy literally got away with murder. Not figuratively, literally. He was the first American to win a plea bargain under the grounds of temporary insanity. He was acquitted of the murder, and the craziest part, the people weren't even mad at Sickles for killing Philip Barton Keyes. They didn't really care about that. What they really cared about was the fact that Sickles forgave his young wife for the adultery. Like, what? He got more backlash from that. And the thing is, at the end of the day, you'll see this is more of a footnote than his actual foot. At the outbreak of the Civil War, Sickles was commissioned to the 12th Regiment of the New York Militia, and due to his previous military experience and political connections, he would be made the colonel of the 70th New York Infantry, and in 1861 he would be promoted to brigadier general, which honestly was probably not the best decision at the time, but we'll get into that. According to Gary Bullard on Daniel Sickles' A Life, Sickles apparently refused to return runaway slaves and instead put them on his payroll, or even conscripted them into the men of his ranks. I mean, everyone's got to do some good, right? And he actually did a lot of good when... See, in March of 1862, he was forced out of his position when Congress refused to confirm his commission. He would fight this and then be reinstated in May, just in time for the Peninsula Campaign. However, due to this hiccup, he was forced to miss a significant battle of Williamsburg, where the brigade that he was in charge of actually saw some significant action. Even though Sickles had next to no experience on the field of combat, he would actually be recognized for his leadership at the Battle of Seven Pines and again at the 7-day battles. He would leave the field temporarily as he would use his political influence to obtain a leave so he could return home to New York and get more troops. This got him out of the field of duty during the Second Battle of Bull Run. Upon his return, he was stationed at the Lower Potomac with his unit as a protecting force outside of the capital, forcing him to miss one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War, the Battle of Antietam. Yeah, I've been there. See, during this time, Sickles met Major General Joseph Hooker. And I'm definitely going to be doing a separate episode covering Hooker because he is also kind of nuts, but we're going to go into him a whole other time. And while they were stationed together, they became really close and fast friends. And in the reports of them being these good friends, they were both considered political climbers, lushes, and ladies' men all in all. And so a lot of the men didn't think very highly of them, even some of them reporting that, and now get this, they attributed the headquarters of Joseph Hooker, when Sickles was there, to a rowdy pub or brothel. And that is just hilarious to me. So yeah, just a bunch of drunk guys with guns, spending money on ladies of the evening, and just getting all around rowdy and reckless. Yeah, nothing says covert in the middle of the night like party. After this, Sickles and his division were placed on the reserves of the Battle of Fredericksburg. Eventually his hard work would pay off, as in 1863 he would reach the rank of Major General, which, I mean, was probably not a good idea for a number of reasons that we'll be going into, but the main one that kept getting brought up was the fact that he was the only one of the commanders to not have a West Point military education, which was a huge deal at the time. And it keeps getting weirder, because he was nominated for the promotion, that then took 2 months to get confirmed by Congress, then took another 2 days for Lincoln to confirm. All the while, during that 2-month span that it was being debated by Congress, mainly because he didn't have a West Point education, he was acting as a major general. And probably the most controversial part of all of this came at the same time as the Battle of Chancellorsville, where Sickles and his team would be put up against one of the most brilliant strategists of the Confederacy. He would go toe-to-toe with Stonewall Jackson. See, at the Battle of Chancellorsville, he was told to hold the position at Hazel Grove, okay? He was told to hold this position. This was the position he was told to hold. And what we really learn more about Sickles, even back when he killed Philip Barton Keyes, is that he has no self-control at all. And this was definitely apparent at Chancellorsville. No matter what, he still wanted to chase down and take out these Confederate troops that he saw running by at night. So he sent a group of men to chase them down, which ended up leading them up to a hill where more Union troops were, and most of his men got wiped out by friendly fire during this battle. So they were wiped out by the Union. With this crippled defense, Stonewall Jackson's men basically just snuck in to the camps under the guise that everyone thought they were the Union because they walked slowly and calmly, versus Sickles' men who barged up a hill. Now, to be fair, most historians are of the same mindset where even if Sickles had listened to his commanding officer's orders and held Hazel Grove, the battle really wouldn't have changed either way, because the Battle of Chancellorsville was an utter defeat when it came to it at the hands of the Confederacy. The Confederacy just wrecked us, and that was just the story of that. Hey, you made it to the end of the... Wait, wrong line. Now we get into what I call the meat and potatoes of the story of Daniel Sickles. So, why the leg? Why do I keep showing this leg? Well, Daniel Sickles' most famous incident actually arrived at the Battle of Gettysburg, which really cemented his foot in history. I promise I'll slow down on the leg jokes. See, Sickles was deployed to Gettysburg in July of 1863 under the command of Major General George Meade, and he was instructed to take a defensive position on the southern hill known as Little Round Top. Okay, hold on. Isn't that just the cutest name for a hill? I mean, I know it's a battlefield and tons of people died, but isn't that just the cutest, most sweet... Like, what is this little guy? See, seeing a slightly taller feature on the field by the name of the Peach Orchard, and not really learning his lesson at Chancellorsville at all, he kind of began to march on the orchard and take that as his defensive strategy, which had a really bad outcome. Mainly for two reasons. One, it stretched his defensive line too thin, and it gave the enemy way too many angles to attack from. See, and like an hour later, Meade had actually called a meeting of the Corps commanders, which included Sickles, but Sickles wouldn't show up until the very end when everyone was, it was over. And so Meade, along with Brigadier General Warren, escorted Sickles to his position, where upon surveying the field, Meade had to explain all the errors that Sickles made in his strategy. Which, I mean, to be totally fair, Meade was incredibly reasonable about this, too. He's like, no, don't pull back your troops. It's already too late. It's only going to endanger our line. We don't want this. We don't need to worry about this. You made the decision, and you have to live with those consequences, basically. Not to pull rank, but... We the same rank. Hold my beer. See, around this time is when the Confederates began their attack, and Meade retreated back to his HQ. With the assault from the artillery and the Confederates, and all the troops just totally advancing on the mark itself, Sickles' corps was virtually annihilated because of his arrogance. During the assault, Sickles' right leg was mangled by a stray cannonball from the Confederate artillery, and a group of soldiers actually had to carry him to this really nearby farmhouse where his leg was amputated. And knowing about an initiative from the Surgeon General at the time to study wounded or removed limbs, he donated his leg to the museum, where it stays today. And Sickles didn't leave the army after that. In fact, he stayed as long as he possibly could, despite being down a leg. And he was disgusted when Ulysses S. Grant actually barred him from field service due to his handicap. To be fair, though, he did end up embarking on a secretive mission to Colombia back in 1865 to secure the compliance with the government over the treaty agreement signed 19 years earlier to move troops across the, stretch that is now Panama. And between 1865 and 67, Sickles commanded the Department of the South and the 2nd Military District during the Reconstruction phase. He did some interesting stuff around this time, too, for sure, like outlawing discriminatory practices and fighting for fair wages of farm laborers. He also tried to ban whiskey and succeeded for a short amount of time. And, I mean, Sickles, come on, what's wrong with whiskey? In 1869, Sickles retired from military service, but he still had a lot of work to do because he was actually appointed minister to Spain in 1869 as well, and he held that position until 1874. Also during this time, it's rumored that he had an affair with the then-deposed Queen Isabella II. His wife was dead, to be fair. His wife was dead by this point. She had died back in 1867. This was like 1871. But he would remarry in 1871 to Carmina Cray, daughter of Spanish Counselor of State. They had 2 children together, too. He also sat as the chairman of the New York Monuments Commission. He was also appointed as the chairman of the New York Civil Service Commission. From 1888 into 1889, he held that position. And from 1890 to 1891, he was the sheriff of New York. And in 1892, he was again re-elected as the Democratic representative in the 53rd Congress, serving from 1893 to 1895. He finally lived out his days until he eventually died in his home in New York at the ripe age of 94 in 1914. This guy's life is nuts. He did so much in such a long span of time, and he almost kept working until the bitter end. Nearly almost 20 years? About 20 years? Come on! This dude did so much, and we don't teach anything about him. It's pretty cool, I would say, and I would recommend looking into him further. He has definitely lived an interesting life, to say the least. But I'm Jay Cobley, and they don't teach that.